Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Writing Fabulous VADs. We're really glad you joined us to talk about and share ideas on the integral, influential, and important topic of VISTA assignment descriptions, and of course, how to make them fabulous. My name is Eric Powell, and I'm an AmeriCorps VISTA training specialist with the Corporation for National and Community Service. I served as a VISTA member and a VISTA leader, and in my current role as a VISTA training specialist at VISTA headquarters, I've seen and worked with lots and lots of VADs. I'll be the host for today's webinar, and I will also be facilitating the live question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Also joining us are Kim and Steve from our partners at LSI, who will be managing the Adobe Connect technology. You may also see them in the chat to help address questions you may have during the session. Let's talk briefly about our goals. Today, we hope that you will be able to articulate the key elements of an effective VAD, because after all, if you're going to write a fabulous VAD, you need to know what goes into one. We want you to define VISTA's focus on capacity building and community engagement, because as I'm sure you know, the VISTA program is focused on building capacity and engaging the community, and therefore the VAD needs to describe the activities, objectives, and goals that focus on those policies. We want you to write member activities that reflect VISTA's focus on capacity building and community engagement, because the activities are specific actions the VISTA member will take that lead towards sustainability and involving community members. And finally, you'll be able to work with VADs as a living document that are tailored to the needs of their community and organization. Many of you posted questions in the registration about can VADs change. We'll talk about how elements of a VAD should be specific to a community and the organizational needs, but we'll also touch on how VADs can change somewhat during the year of service, especially if the community or organizational needs change. Helping us reach our goals today is our guest speaker, Kathy Lenz of Development Plus Incorporated. Kathy's been working with AmeriCorps VISTA members and sponsors since 1998 to really help members begin their service and identify specific steps they can take to succeed in what they are doing for their community and their organization. She has a wealth of experience reviewing VADs, crafting well-written goals and objectives, writing in general, and simply getting the job done. In addition, she works with nonprofits on organizational development and community engagement in the United States and on multiple continents. So now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kathy to get us started. Kathy, take it away.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I want to thank everyone for submitting their questions about VADs when you first registered, and right now with all of the different comments that are coming in from the chat. I see a lot of different things, technical issues that they're taking care of, but a lot of great questions that people had. I want to make sure that we blend those into today's session. As Eric mentioned, please use the chat panel throughout the presentation to ask questions, and we'll try to make sure that we get to those during the presentation and during the Q&A at the end. We have designed this so that you're going to have times to interact with me as well, especially through the chat panel. So I want to get started with some basics, and Irene actually commented on this. She said, I don't even know what it is I'm learning to write about. We're talking about the VADs, the VADs. VAD stands for Volunteer Assignment Description. The VAD details the activities that a VISTA member will perform during a year of service. It's going to have the goals and the objectives of the VISTA project. Now, VISTA sponsors must fill out a VISTA assignment description form for each of their VISTAs who serves in the VISTA projects, and VADs are written per year per assignment. For example, if you have a 3-year project, that's going to require 3 separate VADs, one for each VISTA. And a project that has several VISTA members in the same year, that's going to require a unique VAD for each VISTA member. Now, I've worked with supervisors for years now, and I can imagine that a couple of you are going, wait, I gave them all the same VAD. Or they might say something like, but they're all doing the same work in different communities, so why can't it be the same one? Let me be clear. We are asking for a unique VAD for each VISTA. And the question is why? Well, this is where I want to ask you to tell me. I'm going to ask you to write in the chat box. Think about that for a second. And write the benefits to giving each VISTA a unique VAD. What would those be? So we're going to ask you to go to the chat box right now, and let's go ahead and put some of those in there.
Thanks, Kathy. I see a couple of people are typing furiously, so it looks like a few responses are coming in, but I see a couple of responses. Unique VISTA VADs give each VISTA ownership, and they feel like they have their own part of the VISTA program. It'll really help organize our office to know what our needs are. Tessa says to clarify duties within a project. Nancy mentions it really benefits to develop specific component of the program and give each VISTA their own goals to focus on the project. And I'll mention two quick more because I know we have a lot to cover. Cynthia says it really helps in coaching and evaluating a VISTA's performance and really distinguishing them from what another VISTA member is doing. And finally, a lot of them are coming in. Melissa mentions that each VISTA is clear on the duties that they should perform during the assignment period. So these are really, really great ideas, and it'll help all of us as we move forward. But I'll turn it back over to Kathy. Thank you.
These are terrific, Eric. They had some wonderful things in there. And that's the thing, is we're really doing it for the care of the VISTA. It makes it easier for them. It makes it clearer for them what it is that we're asking them to do. Now, I just want to talk about the fact that the VISTA assignment description, or the VAD, that is the foundation on which the entire VISTA member experience is built. Presenting a VISTA member with a strong VAD from the start of the service, that ensures the member knows what they're going to be doing. And today, our intent is that we're going to review the key elements that make up an effective VAD that will help guide members to build capacity and engage community in the organization where they serve. So let's talk a little bit about what a VAD does. Some of the particulars that we think about: for each VISTA member, a VAD explains the project position and the role assigned to that particular member. It's serving as a position description and a work plan. VADs are used as a learning and orientation tool during the VISTA member orientation, and especially during the on-site orientation and training. And by the way, in case you're wondering, like, wait, what's that? The OSAT? The on-site orientation training. That's something that you conduct for your members in the first couple of weeks of service. We want to make sure that we're bringing the VAD into that part of the process. A complete VAD is also going to include the goals, the objectives, and the activities a member is expected to complete in order to satisfy project needs. If we've written it well, it helps translate the milestones that we have talked about in our proposals into an actual realistic set of activities. The VAD helps VISTA members identify a course of action. And that's really what we're going for here, is that they really want to have clarity about where are we going with this? What is this actually going to create once we're done? The VAD is going to indicate project priorities, organizational and community challenges, and the purpose of the project. And it really would help us as supervisors if we keep in mind the VAD is a living document. The VAD evolves, and it can be adapted as the project evolves. And in some cases, you may find that the unique strengths of a VISTA member are going to become more apparent as you start to work with them during the year. I do want to say, though, significant changes to the VAD should be discussed with your CNCS state office, and the CNCS state office must approve any VAD changes. So make sure that we're thinking about the timeline that we're going to need if we need to have those conversations.
And that's a great segue, Kathy. Let me quickly interject and say a quick important note about eGrants. As you probably know, all VADs, all VADs, must be created through your eGrants account. We won't go into detail specifically on how to work with eGrants in this session, but we will note some important points about the VAD creation that will impact its use in eGrants. So again, for more information about eGrants and how to use it, please take a look at the resources that we have developed, and some of those are located in the Handouts and Downloads pod of Adobe Connect. You can download the helpful links for the Writing Fabulous VADs webinar, and you'll be able to access many more resources on eGrants and how it connects to the VAD. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. I'm sharing this particular graphic that talks about how we're using the VAD all year round, because it captures some of the core ways that we can use the VAD to make the VISTA service year even more productive, both for the site and for the VISTA member. And ultimately, it's going to lead to project success. I'm going to ask you to look at that screen as a left side and a right side. On the left side, because it has multiple uses, on the left we talk about before the VISTA member starts at their site. We're talking about the recruitment and selection. And then on the right-hand side, we're talking about once they arrive, the performance and the reporting. And then after they leave, the record keeping of past progress and future action items for another VISTA member or for the organization. Keeping these in mind will help you create a better VAD, thinking about the before and the after they're on site. So I'm going to start with the left side, and I'm going to start first with the outreach and the recruitment. The VAD helps to find who are we looking for, where do we find them, and how do we connect with them. Frankly, it's a clue that tells us where should we start to advertise and how do we best promote this particular assignment in our community and online. So we want to be thinking there about how can this guide the development of the opportunity listing that you're going to post on eGrants. For those of you who are new, an opportunity listing is a 200-character teaser that will help direct potential candidates to your service opportunity listing that's online through the My AmeriCorps site. And just to back up a little bit more, for those who are new, eGrants and My AmeriCorps are mirrored websites. The eGrant side is for the internal users, like all of you, and the My AmeriCorps is for external users, like potential new applicants coming in. The VISTA project hosted a live webinar last month, so that particular webinar is going to tell you how to create opportunities listings, as well as some tips about keeping information short, using action verbs, describing your organization's work and previous outcomes, and helping the VISTA applicant know what capacity building will look like in that position. So we'd invite you to visit the VISTA webinar pages of the VISTA campus so you could go back and watch that particular segment. The second step in this is selecting a VISTA candidate. The VAD helps you ask the right questions. Like literally, one of the questions you may ask is, tell me about a time when you have done, fill in the blank, and if whatever it is, the activity that you're looking for, it gives you an idea of what have they done. In this case, you can tie the questions directly to the task that the VISTA is going to be doing. Now, I mentioned that over on the right-hand side, we're talking about once a VISTA is already on site. The next one over is guiding and supporting members. We're going to be using the VAD to help the VISTA members get started and help them create a plan for continued development. What is it they need to learn? So use the VAD at the on-site orientation training to get them grounded in the work and identify what additional training and development they need in order to be successful. And the last circle in this line, assessing performance. We're going to use the VAD to help VISTA members in the project define success. How are they doing? How is the project doing? What are the successes? What are the breakdowns, the failures? Are changes needed? Use this time for continuous quality improvement for the project and productive feedback to the VISTA and to you as the supervisor. Now, I'd just like to find out how many of you are using the VAD for these kind of things already. Let's get ready to do a poll. You should now see a poll on your screen, and we would like you to answer the question. The question there is, how do you use the VAD? Select all that apply. So we're going to give you about 30 seconds to go ahead and complete the poll and let us know what are the different ways that you're using the VAD now. And by the way, in case it applies for anyone, you could check, I haven't created a VAD yet, but will soon. So pick your favorite ones.
We'll give you a couple more seconds to enter the poll. We want to get a good array of answers as we see what people think, and it's really a good tool, as Kathy mentioned, just to see what people think. So go ahead and enter your last final responses now to the poll on the screen. How do you use the VAD? And we'll
I just want to point out, Eric, while they're working there, whether you have created VADs, will be creating VADs, or just inherited a VAD from another supervisor, it's really essential to start thinking about how integral this document is. We know that people use the VAD for a variety of reasons, And we want you to see the connection and the trajectory of the VAD from its importance with recruitment, screening, and onboarding, continuing to support members during their service, all the way through to the member finishes and the project has a record of accomplishments and the member has a list of tasks that they can add to their resume and consider, for their professional development. I think we're ready to close the poll.
Great. Thank you for that activity, and based on the responses, we know you could select more than one answer. It looks like the vast majority of you, over 66%, said you use the VAD to guide and support your members, which is fabulous. And quickly following that is selecting a VISTA candidate, then outreach and recruitment, and assessing performance. So it looks like the vast majority of you have created VADs and use it for almost all of these, which is wonderful. And those of you who have not yet created a VAD but will soon, some of the information Kathy is going to go into in a few minutes will help guide you in learning how to create a VAD.
And the important thing to keep in mind is there's no wrong answer, because people use VADs for a lot of different reasons. But if we can keep all of these options in mind, it'll help you think about how important this VAD really is and how you can use it in the future. I realize that for some people the VAD information may be new, and for others it's a refresher. We're hoping that this time and this information will help inspire detailed VADs no matter where you are in the process. So we just want to keep that in mind of all the different ways that we can use it. I want to take a look next at program sustainability. The VISTA VAD volunteer assignment description is based on several of VISTA's core principles. They are the idea that we're creating sustainability by building capacity and community engagement. I want to point out that when we say sustainability, we mean that a project can continue without a VISTA member being there. We often talk with VISTAs about being one of the few workers who are trying to work themselves out of a job. I mean, literally, most people aren't looking for that option, but that's really where they are. So I would ask you to take a look at the stool that's on the right side of our screen. And if you take a look at the legs, you see that it says program capacity, communication capacity, human capacity, financial capacity. These are the systems and the infrastructure that the VISTAs work with in the project. It's where the capacity building work happens. I'm also going to ask you to take a very careful look for the gray band that's on the inside holding all the legs together. That represents the involvement of the community and other stakeholders. That's the community engagement part. Now, here's the catch. VISTA members aren't responsible for program sustainability. Supervisors and their organizations are. But VISTAs can contribute to sustainability, and supervisors can write their VADs so that VISTAs do their work with an eye towards sustainability. We're going to ask you to try to keep that in mind as far as the big picture of what we're trying to create. I want to try to break these down a little bit more. Think of the VISTA members as helping you fill in some of the plans for sustainability. So in this particular case, when we're talking about the capacity building, VISTA members can create, expand, or strengthen organizational systems and processes. In that particular case, you'll find specific examples of things that VISTAs might do. And most often what I see when I look at supervisors and work with VISTAs on their VADs, we talk about engaging volunteers and donors, improve visibility and outreach, build partnerships. So for example, with the volunteers and donors, VISTA members often assist their organization in creating systems, for example, tracking donors and volunteers. Once those systems are up and running, they can enhance your ability to meet community needs long after your VISTA project ends. When it comes to visibility and outreach, VISTA members can often create communications templates and build relationships with local media. And that can increase your stature in the community, draw crowds to your fundraising events, and attract community members to your volunteer projects. And the last one, the partnerships. VISTA members help facilitate mutually beneficial and lasting partnerships between you and other like-minded local and national organizations. Those are all the kinds of things that we're thinking about when we think about building the capacity. The other portion is the community engagement. A VISTA project will engage residents of low-income communities in planning, development, and implementation of a project. The VISTA program places an importance on involving members of the community in the planning process. It's important that we're listening to the voices of those that we're trying to help. We are more confident that we are meeting the needs of the community when we do that. As a result, we're collaborating on solutions with the community directly rather than just providing a service. VISTA requires that you incorporate input from the low-income communities in all phases of your project. The community engagement often comes in the form of advisory groups, also known as a variety council, board, committee, or task force. You can also meet the requirement with significant representation from the low-income community on your board of directors. Now, I talked about the fact that I work with VISTAs and have for a long time with their orientation and their in-service training. When I talk to VISTAs about this work, I talk to them about doing focus groups or key informant interviews to get the program design input and evaluation feedback. Talk about structured community meetings for decision-making or priority setting. In some cases, I talk to them about asset-based community mapping so that we can identify physical, individual, and relational assets. Something I also mentioned is appreciative inquiry to identify the strengths of community organization. In some cases, we talk about how can we do that data gathering with art projects instead of just with words. Sometimes we also talk about preparing current program participants to become the leaders and mentors for future participants. And frankly, the list goes on and on. These are all kinds of things that should be showing up in the VAD of the types of activities that we're doing. These two slides are examples of what can and should be in a VAD, spelled out so the VISTA member can understand the goals, the objective, and the activity, and so that the VISTA member sees that fulfilling the duties of the VAD is helping the project achieve a sustainability. Now that we've talked about these core areas, let's now start to take a look directly at the VAD. We're going to use a sample VAD for the basis of our examples in this session. The organization and the example is called the Waukita Community Services, or WCS. They run a youth mentoring program. Please note that the sample VAD currently available on the VISTA campus will be updated soon with the updated VAD template, and all the resources we share will be posted with the recording after the session. In addition, VISTA headquarters staff are planning to unveil new VAD resources and materials in the next month to help you write, edit, and maintain fabulous VADs. We will email you when the recording and resources are available. I want to start at the very top of this list is talking about the key elements, the title, the details. You're going to find those on the very top on the screen on the upper portion of the sample VAD. Each VAD you create requires a distinct title. If you happen to be creating multiple similar VADs, consider creating a naming system. This might include attributing the year or creating a job number in addition to a descriptive title. I was talking with the team before we came on, and they said, you know, we really do not want a community name in the title, and we don't want acronyms. The title should include the word VISTA, and ideally it's going to be a sentence that's engaging, that tells what that title is. We wanted to share a tip. When creating multiple VADs for VISTA members doing similar work, you can save time by copying and pasting some, note the key phrase there, some elements of the text into those VADs. But remember, each VAD requires its own title. I just want to point out before we move forward that the bottom half of that screen, we're talking about the goal, the objectives, and the member actions. We want to make sure that we then fill those in next on the VAD, and we're actually going to take you through how to do some of that work. I just want to also point out that much of the information that we're talking about, the project name, the project period, the number of members, much of this can be found in your project application. Conveniently, your application is available within your organization's eGrants account. You can easily copy and paste the appropriate content. And if you want the member to see the overall project goals along with concrete objectives and specific activities to accomplish them, you want to think about how can I best put that in so that they have access. The activities work to accomplish the objectives, and then that works to meet the goal. Ideally, they're going to see all of that come together. And we have a sample one here to share with you on that. the goals that we are going to start with, and I just want to point out, somebody asked earlier in the questions, how many goals should we have? You're really talking about 1 or 2 goals for each particular VAD that we're putting together. The VAD, a goal, should reflect the poverty mission of the project, as well as the activities that clearly show how the VISTA member will build capacity at the organization or in the community. And you want to make sure that it's clear and concise in order to guide the project. So we have our sample in front of us from Wakita, and on here I'm asking you to take a look. Can you spot and see how this project addresses poverty? For us, it's the educational, social, and emotional support that they need to help break the cycle of poverty. And how about how they're going to build capacity? Developing a sustainable volunteer recruitment and management system for its mentoring systems. Those are the key components that we want to make sure are going in our goals. And our tip, be sure to copy and paste the goal of the project directly from the goal statement in your project plan, which is part of the project application. So it's already there, hopefully for you, it's been approved, so that hopefully we can just bring it over. So now let's talk about the objectives and member activities. On the left of the arrow, we have the objectives, and those are the ones that you identified for the VAD, and it should articulate what the VISTA member will achieve during his or her assignment. I look at it as the next big chunk. So you have the couple of goal statements, and then the next big chunk underneath it that helps support how that goal is going to happen are the objectives. Each VAD should include more than one objective and include completion dates for each objective. The objectives should form a bridge between your goal statements and the VISTA members' activities, which are the items that are on the right-hand side of the arrow. We're going to stay focused for just a little bit on the objectives. And again, we have a sample from our VAD. By January 2020, plan outreach systems and build partnerships. Now we have some tips for you to keep in mind when you create these. Check that what you've written aligns with your goal statement. So whatever that objective is, it should be in support of making sure that goal happens. And check to make sure that you've put a completion date on there. Now that our objective includes these 2 vital components, let's start to take a look at those member activities. Now, the activity section of the VAD identifies in greater detail what VISTA members should be doing to achieve their objectives. The member activities and objectives should feed into each other and roll up to meet the designated project goal. So when you're putting together those activities and starting to spell those out, list those out, start with the performance milestones that are in the action plan section of your project application, and then edit it into the appropriate activities that you're asking the VISTAs to do. And somebody asked me, they asked in the questions section earlier, they said, how do we incorporate some of these specific skill sets that we want, like digital marketing, data management, all those kinds of things? It's in these member activities that you're going to start to bring those in, and those activities then should be in support of the objectives, which then support the goal statement that we're looking at. So now that we've been talking about these different levels, let's take a look at what that actually looks like. We're going to ask you to go to the chat box, and given the objective that we're working with, what are some of the member activities a VISTA member could do for the listed objective? And by the way, while you're writing, don't worry about perfection. People get killed by and stifled by, oh, but it has to be perfect. No. Now we're just brainstorming. We're throwing out some ideas. Frankly, that's the easiest way to create this. Brainstorm ideas, throw some things up there, and then afterwards go back in, pick what you and choose what you want to keep, and then refine it from there. But for right now, whatever just occurs to you, what might be some possible activities to support that objective?
Looks like a lot of answers are coming in to that question. One from Nancy is to identify specifically a steering committee and find members and facilitate meetings of those committee meetings, which is great. JC mentions creating a social media plan, which will help towards sustainability so someone else can take it on after the VISTA leaves. Heather mentions identifying community organizations first, kind of like asset mapping, and find out what's in the community where they can actually access those resources. And then I saw another one from Kristen, who mentioned conduct informational interviews with community organization leaders, finding out what they know and how they can assist the organization in what they're doing. And I'll mention two more. Jim says create a vetting checklist with criteria for community outreach partners so that the organization knows what criteria they're looking for and not looking for, which is also a useful tool. And then finally I see Tim mentions also checking in looking into the United Way, because they have a lot of other resources, and trying to partner with them to find out how you don't have to reinvent the wheel but can utilize some already existing resources. So these are really, really great specific activities for a VISTA member.
And a first great draft, which is what we're going for.
I'll add before we move on that, as Kathy mentioned, it is very important to continuously think about how the activities connect to the objective, because it not only helps you keep and craft a fabulous VAD, but it really also helps the VISTA member better see the connection between their activities and furthering the organization's mission.
In the next little section, I want to highlight some things that I've learned from working with the supervisors. I've spoken to supervisors at our sessions about ways that we could strengthen the VADs and make it easier to create the VADs. And we came up with this particular framework where we're talking about assess at one level, the next is to act, and the third is to transfer. In the assess, we're talking about the introductory stage of the work that VISTAs are going to do. The act, this is a specific capacity building section where we have what we want the VISTAs to do in that area. And then the last one, transfer. This helps the VISTA members and the sites complete the circle so that sites can use what the VISTA members have done for long-term success. Let's take a closer look at what these are like. So I talked about level one being the assess. Someone asked in the questions, they said, well, how do we approach like what they should be doing during the first few months of the VAD? And this seems to meet what it was that supervisors were talking about. This is the introductory stage of the VISTA members' work. Often I've seen when I've worked with supervisors that they've listed in VADs, VISTAs will attend meetings, which in fact is an activity that VISTA members will do. But writing that in the VAD doesn't add anything to their understanding about the capacity building that the VISTA members will do and what it is exactly you're asking them to complete. So I've often gone back to the supervisor and said, why? Why do you want them to attend meetings? To do what? And the list that you see here are some of their main explanations. The supervisors were trying to help the VISTA members start their work successfully. And so they answered the question with, because I want the VISTA members to, and they said, I want them to assess the current state of our volunteer systems, our fundraising and development, our communications and marketing, our partnership, our technology, like whatever it is that is relevant to you. They wanted them to understand and take a closer look at what the current state of their systems are so they knew where they were starting from and then where did they want to grow to. Another thing that they looked at is identify and understand the key players in their part in addressing the community issues. They really wanted them to get acquainted with some of these folks. The third, understand the historical environment of the project and the community. What has gone on there in the past that could impact how they best go forward. And last, discuss how members of the target community will be engaged in leadership and implementation of the project. And that's really the heart of the community engagement component. Remember, VISTA members look at the VAD at your initial interview with them, during the VISTA member orientation, and at their in-service training. So they're trying to understand what it is you're asking them to do. And if it's unclear, that's where VISTA members get real nervous. That's just that sense of dis-ease of, I don't know what it is that you're asking me to do. So that was the level 1. Level 2 is where we actually ask them to act. It's about creating the tools and the processes. It's the capacity building component. These are the ones supervisors will be the most familiar with. They go back to those 4 legs of our sustainability stool that we looked at a little bit earlier. So, for example, if we were doing fundraising or fund development and we were talking about creating the tools, we might have VISTA members create a database of potential donors with due dates, contact information, and application procedures. Or we could have them create a template for grant applications by program. Or we could have them create a guide for branding all communication materials that our organization is going to use. Or we could even have them create a talking point sheet to guide volunteers and staff on when, so that when they're on a call to make an ask, they know exactly what it is they should say when, in what order. Those are the kinds of tools that we're talking about. We're also talking about creating the processes. So it could be that a VISTA might be creating a training for volunteers on how to make the ask. Or maybe they're creating a schedule for volunteers and staff on when to meet with the donors. Those are all capacity building activities. We want to share with you an example from our sample VAD. And Eric, I have to admit, I looked at this. Can anybody here spot what we're missing in this objective, given what we've talked about? Go to the chat box and see if you can catch what we don't have in there that should be there for an objective.
So I see a couple of responses coming in. Someone says we're missing the date. There's no specific date about the objective and what the time frame is. Brenda mentions there's a lack of a focus area. It's a little bit more broad and it's not focused on a specific area. Someone else mentions the time frame. So it looks like a lot of people are already getting into typing more responses, but seeing that right now there are a few things missing. Loretta mentions it's missing an element of community engagement, no encouragement of the community to get involved. And Pam mentions, which is very accurate, this objective is very general. It doesn't really help understand in detail what is involved in this position. And the final one I see is Brenda mentions it doesn't mention anything about an advisory committee or getting a group together to help solve the problem and resolve the objective. Back to you, Kathy.
And I do want to put a caution in there. Not every objective will have that. Some of them will be, the objective may talk about the community engagement, but not everyone will. Some of them will talk about the capacity building, but not everyone will. You will probably have a mixture of objectives that are talking about the capacity building and objectives that are talking about the community engagement components, which are great things to think about. How am I setting this up? And the important thing on this particular level is that all of these activities are focused on capacity building, not on direct service. Now, for somebody who's new, they may be thinking, what's direct service? Direct service might be things like planting a community garden or teaching a literacy course. Those direct service type of activities are not the focus of the AmeriCorps Vista program. Building capacity, community engagement, that is. So that was the second level that we were talking about when it comes to acting. And in this framework, the third level is talking about the transfer. As supervisors, we need to keep our eye on sustainability. When I talk to VISTA members, I talk about all the capacity building activities that they could be doing. You know, they're talking about, oh, I'm writing grants, I'm doing assessments, I'm recruiting volunteers, I'm creating databases, all of that. And all of that builds capacity. But projects need to think about sustainability beyond the VISTA members 1 year with the project. That was that eye towards sustainability that we talked about earlier. So the real kingpin here then is the transfer of knowledge, products, and relationships. That's what takes it to the next level. So when I'm talking about transfer of knowledge, let me give you some examples of those. Let's say a VISTA member recruited volunteers. Great, that's wonderful. But here's the question. Who else knows how to do that after the VISTA member is gone? Let's say our VISTA member created a database. Wonderful. Who else knows how to create or update a database after the VISTA member is gone? Who can the VISTA member train so that this can continue after the VISTA member leaves? That's that transfer of knowledge that we're talking about. Transfer of products. What products can the VISTA member leave behind for the organization and community to use? What step-by-step instructions? What training manuals? What pre-made training videos could be left? All of those are transfer of products. And last but not least is transfer of relationships. So let's think about this. A VISTA member recruited volunteers. Terrific. Volunteers join because they like the person who recruited them. How are VISTA members connecting the volunteers to the organization so they stay when the VISTA members leave? Because they liked the VISTA member who recruited them, but you want it to last longer than the member. Same thing with donors. Let's say VISTA members get new donors. Wonderful thing. Relationship building is critical to getting and keeping donors. But how are VISTA members connecting the donors to the organization? How can they connect these folks to the staff and volunteers who are continuing the work? That's the transfer of relationship that we're talking about. And in our example, we have here set up a training for a new volunteer coordinator. Well, if we in fact take that as our objective, and by the way, there should be a date on there, just saying, we want to talk about setting up a training for new volunteer coordinator. We're going to help transfer knowledge by doing that training, potentially transfer products if we provide a training manual, and transfer relationships if we organize a social so volunteers can meet the new volunteer coordinator. I'm hoping that some of you are starting to think about your own member activities, about how these might look. And so the question that we're asking you to put in the chat, what transfer activities could you include in a VAD to ensure the sustainability of your program? What would be some transfer activities that you think you might want to include?
This is a great question as we talk about sustainability and capacity building. And I see a lot of supervisors already have experience, so I'll quickly read off because we have a few more things to cover. Stephanie mentions we created a playbook, also known as a manual, so that they could follow along. Heather talks about documents using Google Docs so that people can share and access resources. Another recruitment manual, creating a shared drive, training video, which is a great way to capture information for recording purposes, but also in an innovative and creative way. And more manuals, creating a folder with all applicable files, and also Jean mentions developing a database that provides information, context, and history, as well as an introduction of donors, volunteers, and other key players to the person that's taking over after the VISTA leaves. And finally, I'll mention creating a story bank for social media and e-communications, which not only helps with transferring knowledge, products, and relationships, but also helps with recruitment for future VISTA members. Back to you, Kathy.
These are terrific, and I have to admit that's why I love working with supervisors, because together we come up with really brilliant things of how we can put this together and make it easier. You know, the real key to all of this, sustainability is the ability of a program or an organization to continue engaging community stakeholders to meet the needs of the community efficiently and effectively after the last VISTA member is gone. We want to make sure that we build that in automatically. Now I want to hit a few more highlights. The slide that you see currently, this is the format for writing objectives and member activities in VADs. So once we've done our brainstorm like we did earlier, now is the time when we can bring it back, pick the ones we most really want, clean them up, and put them into proper format. And you see the formatting here. We're going to post a link to additional VISTA, our VAD resources on the VISTA campus and in the chat. And we just ask you to, access that later. Keep looking at some of these links that'll help you along the way. But you'll notice that we formalized it for the objectives as well as how this starts to look for the activities. I've got a few more helpful hints that I want to share with you. When you're working in the formatting and working for the activities themselves, be sure to begin your activity sentences with active verbs. And by the way, we're going to give you a resource that gives you a list of action verbs that you can use. Use words such as launch, market, research, collect, assess, compile. The list goes on from there, but make sure they're active. Be specific, but be simple. We're trying to strike a balance between specifics and simplicity. If the activities listed on the VAD are too general, the VISTA member won't understand what he or she is supposed to do. On the other hand, if there's too much detail in the activity, innovation and flexibility really starts to become stifled. I talk with supervisors and they say, you know, in the ideal world, a VAD is probably no more than 3 pages. Now, I mention that because if a supervisor goes into e-grants only asks you for 1 paragraph, and 1 paragraph is too short. But the same token, I've had supervisors and VISTAs show up to training, and they've had 12 pages. Folks, that is too long. We have gone off the rails. So we're trying to stay within that three-page range, 2 to 3 pages. Some other things to think about, be realistic. Don't avoid being over-ambitious in the activities that we're asking them to do. What is it that we can realistically have them accomplish during this time? Because frankly, when they feel like it's something they can do, they can experience success in what they're trying. And an example I think of, I had a supervisor come in and they said, you know, I inherited this VAD. It says they're going to recruit 100 volunteers in the first month. And the entire room looked at them and said, really? That isn't going to happen. So it was one of those times where we're like, let's just back this back up here. Is there anything we need to change up to make this a little more realistic? And then also delineate the work for each year. Differentiate your VADs for each year of the project. What are the tasks in year 1, such as creating systems or other startup tasks? That might differ significantly from those which are in year 3, which might be training volunteers to carry on the project and other winding down tasks. So we're identifying how the project will progress, and that's going to demonstrate a specific plan for achieving the project goals. And when VISTAs can see that, they can see exactly what they're doing contributes to the overall plan.
And stemming from what Kathy said, I want to quickly touch on prohibited activities because there were some questions that came in about what should be in a VAD and what can we not include in a VAD. So let's quickly go over that. First, there should not be any mention of direct service in a VAD. As you know, VISTAs do capacity building. The VAD should not have any direct service mentioned in it. Second, the VAD should not mention any kind of displacing employed workers, as well as having the VISTA member do activities that should be done by organization staff. We don't want it to look like the VISTA, and it's not approved for the VISTA to be doing any type of work that should be done by actual organization staff. So the VAD should be free of that. And also a whole list of political activities that includes but are not limited to. The VAD should not include attempting to influence legislation by lobbying, any type of voter registration activities, including providing transportation to the polls or similar activities. Those are all not allowed, as well as political activities that may influence the outcome of an election to any public office, whether partisan or nonpartisan. This includes using any official authority as a VISTA member to influence an election. And then quickly also, political activities also include soliciting, accepting, or receiving political contributions for partisan or nonpartisan election activities, as well as advocating or appearing to advocate for political candidates or proposed elections. These should not be in a VAD. And with religious instruction, we know some organizations are faith-based and religiously affiliated, which is fine, but the VAD should not include anything relating to conducting worship services or providing mandatory religious instruction. It is critical that the VAD is free of these items per the Hatch Act, the Domestic Volunteer Service Act of 1973, and additional federal regulations. In addition, VISTA members are not allowed to supervise, should not discriminate, and cannot raise funds for your organization to satisfy cost share or to administer the organization's AmeriCorps programs. So you'll want to keep these in mind as you review your VADs, especially as you examine the specific activities they will do and how the roll-up to the objective and the overall project goal.
I just wanted to follow up on our next step in the process when we're talking about the member activities. And you notice that we have number 1 here, set up recruitment system. Underneath it, we would have an A, B, C. So those would be some of the sub-steps along the way. I'm going to not have us move forward into the activity at this point just because I know we have a few other things to cover and some questions that are waiting. But I just want to point out the fact that this kind of builds, it's just a continuing the building process of, as you create the member activities, you might have some sub-activities that'll go in underneath them. I'm going to have us move forward to take a look at the fact that the VAD is a living document. And when we're looking at the overall steps of what's happening along the way, we are just trying to make sure that we think of those different components that we mentioned earlier. And Kim, I apologize. I'm going to have us move forward one slide. Thank you. We showed this earlier. We just want to come back to it again, that when we do the work with VADs, it's a living document, so we've got to make sure it's tailored to the needs of the community and the organization. It lives and breathes. You're going to create an initial proposal and a VAD to get you started. And that VAD is going to be used to recruit and select a candidate for the VISTA member spot. But you might see a new opportunity that could help your project because of the unique skills, connections, or experience that your selected VISTA member brings to your site. VADs can and often do change with limits, such as if the changes in the VAD you're considering change the measurable outcomes you're tracking for the evaluation, that impacts all of your other partners and needs to be discussed with them first, be that sub-sites, sponsoring organizations, the state offices for CNCS, etc. And if there's a national partner, the national partner. Since the VAD is a living document, it can be adapted as the program evolves and the unique strengths of the individual VISTA members become apparent. But make sure that any significant changes are discussed with your state office before you make them.
Thanks,
Folks,
Kathy.
I just want to recap. We've been talking about the key elements of an effective VAD. We've been talking about the member activities that reflect VISTA's focus on capacity building and community engagement. And we've been talking about working with VADs as a living document that is tailored to the needs of the community and the organization. When we're looking at the next steps, we're asking you to review your existing VADs with a critical eye.
Create a customized VAD for each VISTA member.
Add date ranges to each objective.
Make sure that you detail out sub-activities for each objective.
And update those VADs that are out of date.
And you'll also want to ensure that every candidate has an up-to-date and complete VAD for use throughout their year of service.
Eric, I'm going to turn it back to you because I know we have some things to get to so that we can get to the questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Kathy. So before we get to the questions, quickly, we do really want to hear your feedback on this presentation so we can improve them for the future. So please take a minute to fill out the survey. You'll see a link in the webinar survey link pod on your screen. Kim also posted it in the chat panel, so please, either now or a few minutes after the session, fill it out. We truly, truly appreciate your feedback. While we do that, we know there's been quite a few questions that have come into the chat earlier, so please continue to post them into the chat. I'm not going to open up the phone lines for verbal calls because there's a slew of questions I have listed, so we'll quickly go through a couple as we have a few minutes left in the presentation. But again, if you have questions now, please type them in the chat. Kathy, a couple of the questions that came in earlier, and one I'll turn to you because you started to touch on this, but there might be a little more detail, is how can we make a VAD general enough to attract a VISTA candidate, yet specific enough to accomplish the goals? It's one of those difficult situations that they want it general to be exciting, but they also want it specific so there's measurable outcomes.
And in doing that, it's making sure, again, I would keep it within the 3-page range, but I would start to take a look at it and say, what is exactly we're asking them to do? I think of some of the VISTAs that I've seen when I've looked at their VADs, and I've had VISTAs come up to me and they're like, Kathy, it says I'm going to do an asset map. I don't know what an asset map is. So it's helping them understand what some of those things are, perhaps providing a little bit more detail of what is that or where can they find information on it. But knowing that that's something and a new challenge that they can take on, which is oftentimes a new skill that people get excited about. So that's kind of the dance that we sometimes do along the way. Someone mentioned earlier in here too, they said, well, what about my performance measures? Do my performance measures for the CNCS have to be my objectives? No, I mean, it's good to keep those performance measures in mind, and how will you know if you're hitting it? but you may have other objectives along the way that are going to help you get to where you're trying to be for the finish line that's out in front of you. I hope that helps a little bit.
That's great. And I'll add one more comment, and then we'll take about 2 more questions, and then we'll continue because we're getting close to the top of the hour. But I'll quickly add, to further answer the question, how can you make a VAD general enough to attract and specific enough to accomplish goals? The other thing is, as you're writing the VAD, have someone else in your organization review it and give them your feedback. Sometimes the people that know the VISTA program the least, sometimes are the best people to at least give you advice on, does the VAD make sense? Does the wording sound correct? Does it sound exciting enough to attract? But are there measurable outcomes? So think about utilizing people in your organization. Another quick question, Kathy, is people were talking about goals and not quite sure how many goals to include. What number is too many? What number is too? If you do have any advice on how many goals are enough for one VAD.
We generally tell folks 1 to 2 goals is plenty for a VAD. They'll have more objectives. You may have 2 or 3 objectives under each of those goals, but usually 1 to 2 goals is what you're looking at.
Great. And let me see, the other question that came in is, in developing an effective VAD, is it acceptable to involve the VISTA candidate or VISTA member? So it sounds like a supervisor might be writing a VAD and they have a VISTA now and trying to adapt it for the future. Is it appropriate to involve the VISTA member? And the answer is it's not inappropriate to involve the VISTA member. However, it should not involve much of the VISTA's time. Obviously, you as the supervisor and sponsor should be crafting the VAD, but you can certainly get input from the VISTA, especially if you already have one VISTA and you're writing the VAD for the second VISTA. You might need to talk to the current VISTA to confirm what work they've accomplished in their VAD, and then you can take a look at it to see what ideas they have for the year after they finish. Kathy, do you have any other notes to add to that question?
You answered in terms of if I'm going into the next year, can my current VISTA help? The other thing I'm going to mention is if you start a VISTA and you had a VAD for the interview process and you're meeting with them for the on-site orientation training and you find out they have some exciting skills that could benefit but still lets you get to where you have to do for your outcomes, they may be working with you then to adjust their own VAD to see what kind of skills can they bring to this that'll make this even more powerful.
Wonderful. The final question we'll ask, because we're almost out of time, is, and I just lost it, but, it's actually a question for all the supervisors on this webinar, and some people were asking, are there specific examples of VADs from organizations that have tribal projects? So if you have a tribal project and you have an example of a VAD, feel free to post some comment in the chat, and whoever asked that question will be able to get the answer to that question. We know there's a lot more.
I want to point out also that someone else also asked, is there somebody who has a sample VAD for rural communities? So if you have a sample from rural communities, your fellow supervisors would like to hear from you.
Yes, you guys are each other's greatest resource among this, in addition to your CNCS state office. So we are going to continue. Yes, the webinar is recorded. It'll be archived and available on the Vista Campus webinars page in approximately 7 to 10 days. We'll keep the chat going for a few minutes, but we're going to move to the final slide and say thank you for joining us on today's webinar. I'll mention that we do have a new email address that's been slightly updated, so if you have any questions for our VISTA training unit, especially about webinars, you can send it to vistatraining@cns.gov. We'll soon have an update and more information on the VISTA Supervisors webinar page about upcoming webinars. And then also I'll mention that we want to thank especially our guest speaker, Kathy. She has volunteered to make herself available to answer 1 or 2 specific questions. If you as a sponsor or supervisor have a question, she's graciously agreed to do that. So I'll post her email in the chat, but again, if it's a very specific question that doesn't take too long to answer, she's very busy, but she's also very gracious. So I'll put that in the chat for you. In the final slide, we do want to say thank you again for joining us today. I do want to give a quick shout out to Kathy for her amazing work with VADs, with VISTAs, with supervisors. Thank you to the many VISTA staff and previous staff members who developed and refined the content of this webinar, especially my coworker Melissa McNeely and our VISTA Program Impact and Operations Unit. We also want to thank Kim and Steve with LSI for the Adobe Connect technology. And we, of course, couldn't do this without you, so thank you for the wonderful work you do. Have a wonderful year, and from all of us here at VISTA and CNCS, thank you for serving in the very important